and are just some of the words that you may hear in today's podcast. Enjoy!
Hello and welcome to the Perfect Information Podcast, a board game podcast working through its issues with me, Yorgos Panagiotidis, and the handily placed
Ben Maddox. And as the dreams of tomorrow, Georgios, crash up against the shores of yesterday's disappointment, we find ourselves again in this room, vis-a-vis, my face locked in determination upon your eyes wandering aimlessly to avoid looking at the disgusting apparition sat opposite you.
I'm blue dabba-dee-dabba-da.
That was Jean-Paul Sartre, I believe, wasn't it?
Yes.
In his famous play, Oui, je suis un cochon d'Inde avec ma mère.
That's naughty.
Exactly. What are we talking about this week, Georgios?
It's how I feel about you. No, wait. It's how we feel about... No, wait. It's feelings.
Yes, we're talking about feelings today. We're talking about the emotions that board games elicit. Also, the emotions they specifically don't elicit. And kind of what we would like to see them do that they don't already. And maybe how they would achieve that.
Well, it's quite a lot we're trying to tackle today, so let's get on with it.
Firstly, what do you think when you play games, and let's say a good game, something enjoyable, something you're having, you enter that flow state and it's a lot of fun, and the people sat around the table aren't annoying you and things like that. What sort of is the primary emotion that elicits in you?
Wow. I don't know. I think in my head I separate games, interesting enough, by the emotion they elicit, by the kind of atmosphere that they create. So I don't know if all board games I play can be put down to the same level of eliciting a certain base emotion. I think generally, what they all share, the good ones at least, are that they engage me in some way, that I feel that I'm engaged in an activity with everyone at the table as opposed to everyone at the table happening just... It's not that we just happen to sit at the same table where everyone is going off doing their own thing. We're all in this together. We're working together in some capacity or against each other, whatever. So I think that basically, that there's this feeling of community, of shared experience. I think that sort of connects the entirety of gaming that I feel is worthwhile.
Is it unique to games? Because we talk about why the cinemas still exist. Mm-hmm. When we have Netflix, when we have pretty much access to everything.
Right.
Yet people still desire this communal experience, this desire to sit in a room with other people and experience something. Is that the same sort of thing that's happening in a game?
I'm not sure. I think there's some overlaps in how cinema is experienced and how it works the way it does. And that's true of board games as well, the idea of doing something with other people. But what sets board games apart from film, from cinema, is the fact that it's more interactive, that you're more actually engaged with the people experiencing this game with you. Whereas in a cinema, you sit usually more or less quietly in a darkened space. In a board game, you can see the other people, you can see their reaction, you can reply to how they reply, you can appreciate their reaction or anticipate what they might do next. And that in itself is engaging and exciting and fun.
Do you feel like you're creating something? Or is that nebulous?
I think nebulous is a good way of putting it. I think I'm going to be a bit esoteric here in saying that I do to some extent think that you're creating this experience by playing. And this act of play creates this community of play in this moment during the game. And that is a sense of creation that you engage in, that you sort of enter this small group of like-minded people. You engage in something together. So there's an act of creation there, but not in the sense of I've built an empire or I've successfully led my troops to conquer this hill or whatever. I don't think creation in that sense really registers much in what I play or when I play.
Well, it's interesting because if you go back to childhood, I was speaking to a friend of mine and we were walking through a park, and it was a park that he'd spent his childhood in.
Right.
And he was telling me a story about how there was this one game where they had to walk 20 meters without making a stick crack, without cracking on a twig.
Right.
And if they managed to do it, they were fine. And if they didn't manage to do it, their family were going to die, right?
Right, yeah, kids.
There was this sense there I got of this inventing a communal story. Mm-hmm. Are games similar to that? Are prescribed board games not something that is spontaneously invented?
Right.
But, something that is designed specifically to elicit play? Do they tell those communal, improvised, spontaneous stories too?
I guess. I'm not quite sure, actually. Yes, to a certain extent, I would say yes, they do create some kind of story. The fact that, the way that the fact that the game is structured to beginning, a middle, and an end sort of lays the groundwork for something of a story. You have players sort of as characters, motivated into action by a desire to achieve a certain goal. So you have all the central building blocks of what you need to sort of have a story. People wanting to do something, want to achieve something, acting, their actions changing something, reacting, and so on and so forth, until they reach an end state where whatever's been set up at the beginning has now been resolved. The question at the beginning is who's going to win, and it's resolved at the end. So yes, I mean, all the building blocks of a story are there, but I don't think that these building blocks of a story are what people respond to or what people react to when they have some sort of emotional connection to the game. It's everything that happens on top of this structure that sort of creates an emotional response in people, I think.
It's very interesting because you don't like to attribute sort of anything of the gaming experience to the game, it seems to me.
A little, yes.
You have this sort of thing, whereas I seem to be quite the opposite, in that I believe the construction of the game is what provides the experience. You're about the experience existing independently of the game to some degree.
Well, yes, to some degree, yes.
To which I always ask this question. I don't think I've asked this question now for a while, but
yes.
I ask this question. Then why play games? Why not just sit around and chat if it's not the game that is promoting the experience?
I think you slightly overstated my position that I don't think it's completely independent.
How dare you assert that I just say outrageous statements without any basis in evidence whatsoever?
I don't know
what compels you, Georgios? What compels you?
I think it's my anarchistic spirit.
Is it the power of Christ?
Possibly. Anyway, yeah. So I don't think the experience is independent of the game. Not at all. I think the game fails if that happens. But I do think that it's not the game that creates the experience. It's a game that sort of sets the groundwork, gives you the tools, gives you the elements, but it is the act of play that puts it all together. And without the act of play, without, either skillful act of play to create a community, to create story, to create a group atmosphere, you don't have this experience. This experience sort of falls flat. So I think that's one of the most fascinating questions I find is figuring out just what makes good play as opposed to what makes successful play. Because Yes. Pandemic is a great example in that I firmly believe that a well-played game of Pandemic is one where everybody's engaged, where everybody talks, where everybody sort of argues their case, but they find some sort of common ground and go, all right, we'll do this action instead. This great game of Pandemic is completely independent of whether you win or lose. If you win, that's fine. If you lose, that's fine as well.
Well, I think co-op games specifically are really sort of reinforce that hoary old saying, it's the journey, not the destination. Because if you focus on the destination solely, and that's the important thing, and I think that's why the alpha payer problem arises.
Yeah.
In that you have someone who can see the destination and how to get there. Well, they think they do. And anyone else's input gets in the way of this efficient way to hit the destination. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so they just take over. Whereas co-op games should be about how you get to where you're going to, whether that be failure or success.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that's the rewarding thing.
Exactly. I think, and based on this idea, on this distinction, I think a lot of other games, not non-cooperative games, work similarly in that the game, the rules, the objectives, and everything that happens, that comes in the box, sort of gives you the tools to create a great experience through play. And I think, and it's just this specific experience that you create through play, this creation of story, this creation of group experience that sets games apart from going to the pub and having a chat.
Well, it seems to me it's interesting that you have games that are specifically structured to elicit emotion in people.
Yeah.
And then you have games that isn't their primary aim. So if you look at your social deduction games, their primary aim is to elicit a certain type of emotion, whether that be antagonism, whether that be paranoia, whether that be insecurity. And then you have other games that elicit emotions, but that's not their primary intention. Do you see what I mean?
I know. Yeah, I see what you mean. I'm not sure I would have picked social deduction games, but yeah, I can see your point. Yeah.
Well, of course, Resistance Avalon, and we always talk about this.
Yeah.
You can tell I don't play an awful lot of social deduction games because I always talk about Resistance Avalon. But that is specifically designed to elicit a certain type of emotion. Everything.
Yeah. I agree. I think
unease, paranoia.
Yes, completely. I think this sense of tension, but it's very common in a lot of games that they want to create a certain kind of tension. They want you to anticipate, to fear, but also to hope for certain things to resolve in the way you want to. I mean, you mentioned in other episodes that you enjoy this about Eurogames, the idea of sitting there hoping somebody doesn't take away the thing you want, or hoping that your gamble that you put pays off. This kind of tension, this kind of being on the edge of your seat, excited. Yes, a lot of these games are set out to do this emotion, to create this emotion. So I would have drawn a slightly different comparison that, I think some games are very much about providing a fascinating challenge and are not that interested in what emotions they evoke, whereas other games sort of flip this around. They're not that interested in providing you a great challenge game-wise, but they want to provide, evoke a certain emotion. I think if we're being honest, it comes down to theme versus mechanics. If we're basically some games, and I don't want to sort of put one over the other, but I do feel that some games
I don't think
want
it's
to
theme
challenge.
versus mechanics, though, is it?
No, it's not theme versus not.
Because Avalon isn't really thematic as a game. But the mechanics are there, knowing who's who, not knowing who's who, having one person who knows who's who but can't reveal, otherwise it'll ruin their team's chances. All of that. Actually, whether you win or lose, I don't think that's the intention of the game. The intention of the game is to elicit those emotions. On the part of Merlin, that sort of fear, that confidence in knowing who's who, but that sort of impotence, because you can't say something. In The Spies, that sort of smug complicity between you and your other players, but also that frustration when they twig.
Yeah.
And they pick the wrong team. It's all about eliciting emotions. Whereas I would say Orion, for instance, is about figuring out a puzzle. And the mechanics are there to facilitate a smooth gameplay experience, not to facilitate emotions. But what's interesting is that both of them do elicit emotion.
Yes.
And I think they're similar in many ways.
All right. In what way?
Well, because I think what board games elicit primarily for me is a word that has a negative connotation, but I think in this case, it's the best word to describe it.
Is it bloodlust?
It's cock hunger.
There's nothing negative about cock hunger.
I'm constantly hungry for all the time, like 20 in my face, like beating them away. The fucking testicles just smack me on each cheek.
I don't see how that is negative, but yeah.
But it's tension.
Yeah.
Board games, for me, elicit... Is tension an emotion, or is it a physical response?
No, that's it.
But it elicits tension. And in different ways, but it's that tension of, can I do what I wish to do, firstly? Are my own limitations going to hamper me doing what I wish to do? Then you had another layer of, are the other people around me going to limit what I'm going to do? And you have these two levels of tension banging off each other for the entire game. And I think that's what board games give me. And it's not a negative tension. It's a positive tension that encourages a clarity of thought, that encourages a working through of the underbrush of the brain to get through to this destination that you wish to find.
I can see that totally. I mean, amusingly enough, you basically describe exactly what puts me on edge about games. I don't like having to sort of be at the whims of other players in what I'm trying to do. It's a huge source of frustration for me in a lot of Euro games that it's not in my control to actually achieve what I want. It's not up to me. It's up to whatever somebody else does. And I'm not quite as energized by tension. I enjoyed a little bit, like a slow simmering in the background, but it's the one reason why I'll never play Diplomacy again. It's a very tense game, and there are a lot of things I find quite interesting about it, but the experience, I think, was horrible for me, because there's so much tension there that didn't do all these things you mentioned. They didn't clarify my thoughts. They didn't motivate me. I didn't feel invigorated by the whole thing. It felt to me as oppressive, limiting, and just something I wanted to get away from.
Yeah, I mean, Diplomacy, if you're not into it, it's 8 hours. It's an 8 to 10 hour.
Yeah.
It's an 8 to 10 hour tension fest. So, it's exhausting. But I also think there is a distinction to be made between tension and frustration.
Sure.
Because I feel both sometimes. Mm-hmm. I can play a game and just nothing clicks.
Right.
For whatever reason, the brain is just not in the right place. And usually it's not through the intervention of others. It's not usually people interfering with what I want to do. It's just simply my brain doesn't allow me to work. And when that happens, it tips over into frustration, which is bad. Because then because I'm a very vocal person, I start taking it out on the people around the table,
See, this is very funny, because I'm exactly opposite. For some reason, games I don't get, I find inherently fascinating. If I sit down and play a game and I see, all right, it's not just random bullshit. It's not just, I didn't get the right cards, I didn't get the right numbers. But when I can see there is logic to what's happening, there is something underlying the whole thing, and I can't grasp it, that propels me into, so I want to play this again. Why didn't this work? It's fascinating to me. So that's quite interesting, because we seem to be on polar opposites than what we appreciate in games.
So what don't they elicit?
See, I thought about this.
What do you not get from games?
I thought about this on my way here. I think as of right now, a lot of games do not cover the same range of emotional responses that things like movies or books do.
Okay.
And
like what?
Well, most obviously, fear. Like, you don't get the experience of a comparable experience to a horror movie, in a game. You don't get the comparable experience, you don't get something like, you get from a romantic novel in a game. And I think that's partly because nobody actively tried to do that. But it's also partly because, for two reasons. One, both books and movies, at least cinema, is an experience that works on depriving you of all the other senses and focusing you on just one source of information. You don't have any distractions in a cinema usually. You're really annoyed when you're distracted, actually. It's all dark. Everything you hear is focused on the movie. Everything you see is just the movie. There's no distractions. All you experience, you create, basically this is where immersion as a concept really took off. The idea of you sit in a cinema, you immerse yourself in the movie, and that's why the emotions work. The same with a book. If you really immerse in the book, you ignore the world around you. With board games, this is difficult, because you have interaction all the time. You have personal interaction. You're usually playing in a well-lit place. You're playing at home or maybe some public place. There's a lot of commotion going on. There's always something happening. There's something to talk about. There are a lot of distractions, which is again why so many board gamers appreciate this flow state or immersion that they get into, because they can focus on purely the game and they get a clarity of emotion, get a focused experience, that just seems to come out of the game itself and not from any distractions. One of the reasons why I think some emotions haven't been covered yet in board games.
I don't think fear can be done. And for a number of reasons. One, you're right. Why is a horror movie scarier when the lights are off? Because you're being forced to focus on this horrific thing and there's no other distractions.
Right.
Someone's chatting to you in your ear and you're watching The Shining. It's just not as scary, right? That's a fact. But I think games have an inherent issue, because why do we become scared? Because we lose control. And the fact is, within a horror movie, there are all of these things that contribute. There's the music, there's the script, there's the sound effects, there's the scary monsters. But why are we scared? Because we don't know when it's coming. The story is out of our control, and it is fed to us by an unseen hand. Mm-hmm. And so we just don't know. That's why life is scary, because you just don't know. Whereas in a game, you take control of your turn. You determine the pace of the story. Board games can't elicit that kind of fear because you cannot cede control. Because if you cede control, the game doesn't work. So a role-playing game, can work because you cede all of the control of the story, of the scary elements of when to build up tension and release it, are given to the GM. Mm-hmm. In a board game, you control it all. You never cede control. The game only functions if you control the game. Otherwise, the pieces on the board simply don't move. Therefore, fear is impossible.
Maybe, yeah. Well, like I said, nobody actually tried to make I think proper scary, not just disgusting board game. I don't want to rule out that it's possible. I think there are ways.
I think Arkham Horror is an attempt.
To some extent, yes.
To build up tension and fear. I just don't think it works.
It's mostly dread. But yeah, I think dread works, and I think a lot of horror works with dread as well. I think to a certain extent you can cede control by using, just the top of my head, you're using like the mechanic in Robinson Crusoe, where you know something is coming, something bad is coming, but you don't know when. So you have ceded control to a certain extent to the game in when things are released, tension builds up, and when it pays off. I think there's this horror role-playing game, Dread, used with the Jenga tower, that also successfully builds fear, or at least dread, some sort of your desire to avoid something bad happening.
Because you're ceding control. You're ceding control to something. You're ceding control to a Jenga tower.
Exactly.
There is an illusion of control, but you're ceding it. And also the scary moments are fed to you in a very traditional narrative manner.
Sure. I mean, just generally speaking, I think you can use all kinds of interesting, innovative mechanics to sort of create this feeling of powerlessness. And I think the one thing I would add also is it's not just helplessness that creates fear in a movie. It's also empathy. And I think empathy is something that can be done in a board game. And I think, again, I don't have an example of a board game actually creating fear. I think it's difficult, but not impossible. I don't think it's categorically impossible. I wouldn't know how to do it, but I don't want to rule it out because I can see sort of the potential being there.
Well, if you're talking about empathy, right? Why do we empathize with our characters in role-playing games, right?
Because they're us.
Because we create them, yeah?
Well, they're literally us.
Well, they are. They speak through us, and we create them. Their birth is down to us. Well, I'm surprised that we've not had a board game yet in which you create your character. I mean, they borrowed a lot of stuff have come from role-playing games, but character creation isn't one of them. If you look at all of these games, your Fantasy Flight, Cthulhu type games, they borrow stuff from role-playing games, yet they prescribe which character you're going to play, and you're going to play one of these 1920s archetypes that inevitably you're distanced from because they don't speak through you. They're not who you are. And it surprises me that you don't create There's a game yet in which you create your character in a role-playing style.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, most games seem to go for, some games seem to go for customization as you play.
Yeah.
Which is great, which is fun.
Getting a sword and shit isn't the same as giving birth to a person, though, is it?
Sure. I assume so, yes, having not given birth to compare. But,
metaphorically, of course, I don't mean literally.
Well, right, I was kind of confused. Anyway, I think, yes, it's not the same, but still, I do notice that people who build up their characters from one game to the next. I mean, Pandemic Legacy is a case where I've played with 2 players, and we had certain characters we kept being drawn to, and we didn't want to lose them. There wasn't empathy there. There was a fear of them dying in the game there. So I think that the potential I feel is there, but it's not quite on the same level. I haven't actually, just draw back. I haven't brought up the second reason why I think, certain emotions are impossible. I hope we get to that later on.
But it's interesting in Pandemic Legacy.
Yeah.
You name them. That's a thing. I think that's a thing. It's a level of ownership that other games haven't had up until this point. I don't think it's full character creation, but it's significant.
Yeah, but I mean, still, even though you name them, the thrust of your investment in the character, I believe, is still the improvements you get. It's still over time, they gain this special ability and
for sure.
Oh, I can do now. I now can do more. It's not the character that's more capable. It's you.
Well, the characters are tools of utility in board games.
Yeah.
They are. Especially if you have your sort of narrative games. They're tools of utility. They're not something to be protected. They're things to be discarded. Now, maybe you can have a sort of emotional connection to certain characters and wish they don't die, but I would suggest that's probably more a utilitarian argument. If we lose this character, we don't get this buff anymore.
I know what you mean, but I didn't experience it like that in Pandemic Legacy. It was a definite mixture of, yes, I don't want to use the ability, but also I've grown attached to this character. I don't want to see this character die.
Which I think if you go further, whereas you create the character's abilities, the character's personalities become something that you've created, then there's more jeopardy there.
Possibly, yeah. I can imagine.
Okay, quickly, just to wrap up then, tell me your other reason why board games don't elicit these emotions.
I think that has a lot to do with, I think it's going to be a bit larger, but basically, I think we denigrate people who do not have the right kind of emotional reactions to games. With film and books, it's fine to cry. It's fine to be scared. It's fine to sort of hurl the book across the room because you're really frustrated. We don't accept this kind of emotion in board games and call people who do that immature. And I'm not saying if it's wrong or not, but it basically leads to the fact that certain emotions we are taught need to be walled off when we play board games. You can't get too emotionally attached to what happens because it's just a game and you're not supposed to have any deep emotion. You're not allowed to have any sort of emotional investment that goes beyond a certain level because that breaks the game because you're taking it too seriously. So basically everything that we're fine with in books and movies that elicit deep emotion, heartfelt emotion, we don't want to see in board games.
Yeah, but the problem is, isn't it, within a board game, because those emotions are then being directly channeled towards your interaction with physical objects and also your interaction with people who are conscious and sat around the table in front of you. If you indulge those emotions in the way you would indulge those emotions in real life, it's absolutely socially negative. If your anger comes out as fucking spitting anger, if you just sit there and start weeping because one of your characters has died, if you sit there and start weeping because one of your characters has died in Pandemic, there's something else going on than your character dying in Pandemic, I'm afraid.
I don't know, maybe, but my point is basically that in certain narrative media, you're allowed to have certain reactions. In board games, you're not.
Yes, but you're not.
But like you said,
you're not asked to demonstrate them, though, are you? If you sit in a cinema, you might go, but you're not going to sit there and go, I'm so fucking angry that Nelson Mandela's in fucking prison. I'm going to fucking shout at the screen.
Again,
you're just not going to do that.
Yeah,
are you?
but that's just culture. I mean, there are a lot of, I've heard a lot of stories of people in other countries actually screaming at the screen. It does happen. It's just we're accustomed to sitting there quietly and crying at the appropriate moments and gasping at the appropriate moments and turning away in horror in appropriate moments.
Well, I think that's fine, isn't it? I think because enjoyment is fine as long as you're not encroaching on the enjoyment of anyone else. And if you're playing a game and something happens that makes you angry, if you then turn to, and I mostly do this in a jokey manner, but if you turn to someone and go, if you fucking do that again, I'm gonna fucking break your nose, you fucking twat. Because you're angry.
Yeah.
That ain't acceptable, is it?
Yes. I will.
And it's not about denigrating those people. It's about, come on. Board games exist. Board games exist within the fucking society in which we live. And so acting in an antisocial manner, whether it's a game or not, is just unacceptable, no?
I think the challenge that board games provide in this sense is that they are far more complex endeavor than sitting in a cinema and experiencing movie, and more complex than the solitary experience of a book. I think you're right. It's a group experience. You're moving in very, very challenging territory, social, when we talk about social interaction, when one of the players at the table starts crying. I perfectly agree. I don't want to sort of just write it all off as it's unacceptable, go away, stop crying. I do want to ask, why do we not allow this? Why? I mean, it's hard, it's challenging, it's difficult to figure out, right, how do we handle this now? How does this person handle their emotions? And how do we handle it as a group? How do we give them support? How do we give them the room they need? And how can we still keep them within the group and keep the game going? These are all fascinating questions to me. These are challenging questions to me. They're not simple.
I mean, I don't know. I've never been in a situation where someone has cried.
I've been, but then I used to play games when I was 8 years old. So.
Right, okay. But the point is, I mean, as I come back to it, if someone's going to cry over Orléans, there's something more than Orléans going on, isn't there? You know,
I don't know. I think that's a separate question. I mean, what I'm interested in, what my point is basically, is that we have sort of put board games into this corner where certain things we don't allow them to exist, and then we ask questions like, why can't board games elicit fear? Why can't they elicit romantic longing? Why can't they elicit the kind of emotions I get from a movie or from a book?
We're not comfortable with emotions, and that's the fucking fact. We are given the freedom in a cinema to elicit those emotions because no other fucker can see us. We're allowed to sit there and weep quietly. We're allowed to sit there and feel fear in our own way. The difference is, if you're sat in the pub opposite someone and you spontaneously start crying, unless someone's recently fucking died, or, something terrible has just happened, people don't want to see it.
But it's
people
not spontaneous. But that's the point. It's not spontaneous. We're talking about an emotional reaction to the game. Therefore, if you react emotionally, it's because of something that happens in the game.
Well,
let me finish just my thought. The argument basically is, and that's, I think, at the core of all of board gaming, and it's something that I find disappointing, is that we are so indoctrinated and so convinced of the triviality of what we do, of the frivolity of games, that any attempt to attach anything other than superficial emotional reaction is looked at as a strange overreaction. Something is wrong. There's something amiss. There's something breaking down, whatever. But we will not accept that somebody could feel deeply affected by something that happens in the game.
Because it's an overreaction. Because fundamentally, when you look at what's happening in the world, and we keep coming back to these things, when you look at what's happening in the world, that expending that much emotional energy on something that fundamentally doesn't matter is an overreaction. It is an overreaction, and you are indulging your emotional reaction to the detriment of everyone else. And you're the person who keeps saying you should monitor yourself and tailor yourself to the experience of everybody. To sit there and get angry or start fucking weeping is absolutely disregarding everyone else around the table.
I didn't say you should disregard everyone at the table. I explicitly said, yes, it's challenging. It's difficult to find the right level. But what I'm arguing against is the idea of, even though everything is happening in the world, why is it fine? Would you argue that it's wrong to now go to cinema, watch a sad movie and cry? Is it wrong to be scared of a movie in cinema? Is it wrong to be mad at something that happens in a book that you're reading because everything around you is so awful?
But it's how you, what's the word I'm looking for, Georgios?
You're right, Georgios. That's what you're trying to say. You're completely right, and your brilliance is outmatched only by your beauty.
I never doubt that. I only play devil's advocate.
Right.
Because we need some sort of dramatic tension. No, but the thing is, it's the way you then demonstrate those emotions.
I agree. No, it's
if you go to the cinema,
challenge.
if you go to the cinema, right?
Yeah.
And you watch a movie. So I watched Boyhood, and Richard Linklater does things to me, and I cried 3 times during that film, right? But I didn't come out of the cinema afterwards and then go and see my friends like, oh, fucking Boyhood, oh my god, because that's not the social contract we sign with all the people we know. This is the point. To sit there in a game and start, it's just not.
Yeah,
right.
but you have to keep in mind the social contract you mentioned is something we ourselves decide upon. It's not something that's thrust upon us. It's not some immutable law. It's like if we want to engage in a game in a way that affects us deeply. I mean, I've seen this happen in role-playing games where I think the range of emotion you're allowed to have is much broader than in board games. And I don't think it's because role-playing games are inherently more valuable and less trivial than board games.
No, because they are completely constructed around eliciting emotion. They're one of those games that are constructed around eliciting emotion.
But didn't you just at the beginning of the topic say that a lot of these games are constructed around eliciting emotions? Well, this is the point.
And you see the broadness, the acceptable, turning around to someone and going, no, you're fucking wrong, you're fucking wrong. In Resistance Avalon, can be acceptable. Playing Orleans going, you're fucking wrong, you put that fucking thing there, you're fucking wrong. Is not acceptable.
Well, of course, because that's not the reaction that makes any sense in the context of the game.
Well, it is. Maybe someone puts something on something you fucking want to do, and then you go, no, that's fucking not right. And that's the point. It's not because we think games are trivial, it's because you absolutely shouldn't go outside social norms of acceptable expressions of emotion just because you're playing a game.
Yes, but I'm saying we should question those social norms. I'm not saying you should ignore them. I'm saying we should question, we should think about, is that something we are fine with? Is it something that we go, I don't want board games to be any more emotionally affecting as they are now? Or are you looking at board games and go, it would be really interesting to sort of push the boundaries. I do maybe want to play a game that does make me scared. I do want to play a game where I do feel some sort of mushy, romantic feelings like in a rom-com. Maybe I do want to feel a game where I'm like outraged at the injustice of whatever. I mean, That's my argument, basically. Are we fine with board games being fairly low key in their emotional investment, except for some outliers like diplomacy? Or should we at some point ask ourselves, isn't there more? Couldn't we get more out of board games? Couldn't board games be more broader in their emotional palette, like movies, like books?
Or are they simply capable of it? And so, go on the Guild. Tell us. Are we just inhibited by our Judo-Christian morality?
Repression.
Or are board games just simply incapable of eliciting the emotions that we get in other forms of media?
Also, do answer the question, am I beautiful or am I insanely beautiful?
I'll see you later, Georgios.
See you around.
I want to live in a world where everyone can easily splay up to 15 cards in one hand, knows all the ranks of possible poker hands, knows at least 3 traditional card games to play with a set of cards, and can bridge shuffle cards. Seriously, sit down at a table with someone who knows how to bridge shuffle and learn a valuable life skill. I'm TC Petty III, and this is Deep Design with TC Petty III. A brief history of playing cards. When people describe a board game, they always include 4 key things in their description: a board, dice, rules, and cards. This episode, we're going to talk about cards, specifically about the history and evolution of the traditional playing card and how you can use this knowledge to your game design benefit. Wink. Cards began as rectangles. These rectangles were made of paper. These rectangle-shaped pieces of paper had stuff on them. Historians now believe this is the case because of a shift from writing manuscripts on paper rolls to single sheets, and because Chinese people invented the first good method of creating paper, and because Chinese was written vertically from right to left, it made good sense that the characters would need a space that is more vertical than horizontal. Back then, they didn't really care about how cards were fanned within a player's hand because the most popular games required traditional card or tile racks. In fact, the same Chinese characters used to describe both cards and tiles during that time, so it becomes even more confusing to research. But it means that card games were designed to be viewed face up on a table, so all information was large and easily viewable. This was the first consideration when shifting from tiles to cards. One aspect that has remained relatively unchanged is the backside that serves a single purpose, to hide the important information on the reverse side from all other players. This appears to be the key innovation of cards and tiles that resonated with so wide a spectrum of players. This key division between the table and a player's hand intrigues us even now and has spawned a billion bloody fistfights and hair-pulling arguments the world over. Because paper was invented, and because paper cards could be created much easier than the wood and stone and bone and ivory engraved tiles of Mahjong and other tile game sets, the card game began to spread. It made it to Egypt, then most likely to Europe from there in the 14th century in the form of Mamluk cards. It's debatable, but it really isn't important other than the standardized inclusion of 4 distinct suits, and the familiar court cards, which are thematic. If you have a keen eye, you'll notice traditional playing cards are not completely abstract and never were. They represented real-life things. In the Mameluke set, the 4 suits were polo sticks, coins, swords, and cups, things that were familiar to the upper class. In more abstract words, they represented games, money, war, and religion. If we were theming this deck today, I think the modern version would look more like dice, cash money, guns, and Bibles. France, during the 15th century, abstracted the suits to our common hearts, diamonds, clubs, and spades format, or churches, archers, farmers, knights, or clergy, aristocracy, peasants, and military, and still including members of the ruling class as the court cards. Cards were banned in China, cards were banned in England, cards were banned in Japan, cards were banned pretty much everywhere at some point, because people didn't really know how to handle fun back then. Literally. And of course, because cards are one step away from sin. J.D. Carlson, a Southern Presbyterian preacher who may or may not be dead now, explains like a true conspiracy theorist.
Men who know me tell me this is true. The cards have a secret language. Here is what I mean. The king card represents the prince of darkness, the devil. The 10 spot speaks of the spirit of lawlessness. It speaks in opposition to the moral law as found in the 10 commandments in the Bible. Then the club card represents violence and murder. The Jack speaks of the loose-living man, the lustful man, the licentious individual who lives to satisfy his lower nature. The Queen card represents Mary, the mother of our Lord. In the language of the cards, however, Mary is represented as an impure, dissolute, immoral woman. There is the Joker. It represents Jesus Christ.
What a bunch of bullshit. The sermon is from the last 50 years. It's pretty ridiculous, and as you probably noticed, I've already refuted the entire thing by explaining the evolution of the traditional playing card. Okay, so it was me doing a preacher impression there, but listen to this guy's actual voice.
Now is the time to prepare for death. Now is that time. I've heard people say they're going to wait until the 11th hour and then they'll prepare to die in the 11th hour. Don't do that. You could die at 10:30.
I love it. Don't worry, I can poke fun at Christians, because I totally have some friends that are Christian. But it's not just Bible thumpers that fear paper rectangles. The Islamic Standing Committee in Saudi Arabia has stated that playing cards are not permitted because they distract people from remembering Allah and prayer. And Hindus... well, Hindus are cool. They're like, whatever. We kind of like everybody. Pretty much every European country had a law against cards by the 15th century, and pretty much every knee-jerk reaction law against non-gambling card games were eventually overturned. Historically speaking, the human race has a real issue with allowing itself to engage in entertaining activities. If something makes you smile, it's probably been banned at some point by someone. I think, though, in most cases, people around the world can all agree that cards are not the abominable distractions that they once were perceived to be, and that in the modern world, we have so many World of Warcrafts and free slot machine apps on our smartphones and Minecrafts that playing cards are generally considered family time. And it's interesting all the same that throughout history, when games are not perceived as valuable, either through their educative or transformative properties, they are disregarded or attacked for being sinful wastes of time. On the design side, however, we're talking 1860 to 1870 and later for most modern innovations to become standard. That's about 500 years of stagnation and about 10 years to fix it. That's the Industrial Revolution, baby. Alright, so they did add colorful backs to the cards sometime in the 1700s, but even then that was spotty. Knaves, K-N-A-V-E-S, were changed from knaves to jacks to avoid confusion with the abbreviation for kings. It might sound like a really obvious problem to fix, since it would be K and K-N, but most people back then were pretty fucking dumb, and they were illiterate, so it really didn't matter. Until then, they didn't print indices in the corners because people held their cards in two hands and couldn't read letters anyway. Previously, because of this, cards were held widely in both hands in a diagonal cascading fashion. If this sounds awkward, try it. It feels awkward. It looks awkward. Indices that showed the suit and rank in the upper left corner made it possible to fan the cards in one hand. And the ergonomic changes didn't end there. Card corners were, for the first time, rounded to prevent cheating and, for ergonomic reasons, to prevent them from digging into a player's palm. To prevent cheating and to protect idiots again, cards were mirrored to prevent giving away information when court cards were turned to the correct direction in a player's hand. Suits and numbers were placed in their respective locations in the upper left corner and upside down in the lower right. Rectangles to prettier rectangles. 800 plus years of dicking around with rectangles got us to where we are today. So what can we learn as designers from all this history? Well, cards are rectangles. If you stray from this formula, there should be a reason. It makes cards easier to shuffle. They align perfectly in a pile. Blame the Chinese for this completely accidental bit of historical awesomeness. Ever tried shuffling square cards or getting them to align correctly? It's a pain, and circles are even worse. Cards should have a uniform back. If not, you should have a reason. If the front of your cards are reversible, your backs should be as well. The point is that the backs obscure info, and you do not want to give away unintentional cues by having players shifting or not shifting cards around in their hand. Cards should be easily visible and distinguishable when played on the table, and double-coated with important information in the upper left corner when possible. Complex cards should have art or a name that is clearly distinct from other cards. Suits, or grouping various cards together by similar types, numbers, colors, or abilities, is very accessible to the way the human brain chunks information. The reason that traditional cards have white borders is not a mistake. Colored edges can chip and show marks more easily. Also, if a deck of cards is viewed from the side, a player can see when a certain card is coming by the color. If this is important to the game, don't use full bleed images on the face, or just require plastic sleeves for tournament play. Simple cards in their layout should recede into the background and allow gameplay to take the forefront. Upper left corner is key. Make the most important info easy to see in the upper left-hand corner of the card. Theme is important. However abstract or pasted on it may be, it lets even the dumbest, most illiterate of individuals more easily understand a game. If it's not educational or you can't justify it as such, gaming is a waste of time. Or it's sinful. No matter the other benefits, unless your game instructs kids how to do stuff, it will never be more than, quote, like Monopoly. Even famous movie critic Roger Ebert has stated that games can never be art. Every other medium can be, but not games. Luckily, Roger Ebert is dead. Also, if playing cards are evil, then Magic the Gathering cards should literally burn in your palms while you play. But wait! Playing cards aren't perfect. 800 years and there's still mistakes that should be fixed but are not. Suits are not distinguishable enough. I work at a casino. I see players squeeze out their cards as they look at their hand every single night. Oh, it's black. Come on, spade. Come on, spade. Why are clubs and spades shaped so similarly? There's no reason it should be fixed. Also, we need to find 2 more bold colors to differentiate the suits. Blue and green don't cut it. Some graphic designer needs to get on this. Playing cards are super abstract. If you want to tell a story, look elsewhere. If you want players to become a role, it's not going to happen. And just to note, be careful always following the design of playing cards, as sometimes the most important info on a card is not the suit and number. If this is a unique card with a special ability, it may be most important to show the name of the card in the upper left for memorization. Magic the Gathering unintentionally did it right by putting the name in that spot. Most important info in the top left is key, and although it is the single dumbest argument ever for playing cards, some people who are left-handed also are stupid and claim that they have trouble splaying cards in their hands with the symbols in the upper left-hand corner. Those people would prefer the symbol in the upper right. Seriously, this argument always pisses me off. Watch me. Watch me. Watch me pick up some cards with your ears. Listen. I am splaying them backwards in my right hand. Oh my fucking god, it's so hard. Since you can't see it, no, it's not hard at all, especially if I did it every game. You're left-handed, not disabled. But, point taken. Since players with mobility issues may play your card game, if your game is simple, abstract, and or has no aesthetic reason not to, it can be ergonomically positive to place information in all 4 corners of the card. The conclusion! Now that you have some design tricks up your sleeve, play your cards right and use this ace in the hole as your trump card. I hate myself. But if you learn anything at all from this wall of words, remember that there are logical reasons why cards have slowly transformed over the course of 1,000+ years. I'm not saying you'll be stabbed 17 times and left to bleed out naked in a gutter if you don't follow this advice, but I'm not saying it won't happen either. Wink. And if a crazy, pretentious game design artist like myself is saying all this, tradition might actually be worth defending.
Is that your name on the list? Well, get in there then. Get to the bar and get buckled. Welcome to the guild. Oof. Oh, it's been a long 2 weeks for me, Georgios.
It's been an eventful 2 weeks, I agree.
I've just emerged out of my absinthe coma.
Yeah, that's usually what happens with absinthe, I've been told.
I decided that the only option I had was to descend as deeply as I could with the Green Fairy, Georgios.
So Thursday.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I've just woken up, and people have told me, Johan, for instance, told me that the pole in the corner,
what?
The dancing pole in the corner.
Oh, right. I thought you meant the other Johan.
No, Johan the owner.
Oh, right. Not Johan the dishwasher. I think it's a
There's a lot of people called Johan here.
Yeah, I know.
Have you noticed that? It's weird, isn't it?
I've noticed there's a surprising lack of females as well, but it never bothered me.
Well, Janine works here.
Janine, yeah, and that's about it. Any of the patrons? It's complete.
No, none of the patrons are female.
No.
But that's alright.
Sure.
Anyway, he tells me the pole in the corner.
Right, not Johan.
I was trying to eat it like it was a stick of Blackpool Rocks, Georgios.
Well, we're supposed to dance on it, but fine, yeah.
And then apparently I was sat next to it, hugging it, calling it Rocky pair of socky. for a solid 48 hours. That's all I said, George. All I said.
See, I'm not actually surprised. I'm just kind of impressed that people didn't block this memory immediately.
And I mean, what's amazing is how permissive it is here in this guild.
No, yeah, it's quite nice. I like the glass tables.
I like there's a room downstairs,
Right.
that's just completely black.
Ah, the black room, yeah.
And I've not been in there yet.
It's apparently some sort of theatre installation.
I've heard it's a massage parlour because
Really?
I hear a lot of noises of sort of muscles being eagerly
I
massaged.
think that's the gym. There must be.
It's a gym.
I'm
Why do
quite
they
sure.
Why do they work out in the pitch black, Georgios?
It might be some sort of inclusivity thing for visually impaired people.
Or it might just be, that we don't care about our muscles. We're doing this simply for fitness. We don't care how we look.
Exactly.
Ah, right. So that makes sense.
Yeah, probably.
When someone says, "Can I spot you?" downstairs.
Probably. What's an otter?
I don't know, but I've heard a lot of talk about otters and a lot of talk about bears. There's quite a sort of strong wildlife
Yeah, there's a very strong
obsession in this place.
I don't know what it means. I find it really confusing. I don't much care for wildlife. I'm more of a city person myself.
But I've got really into frappes.
Oh yeah, frappes are great. I actually got into frappes at home, yeah.
I mean, obviously the last 2 weeks it's just been absinthe and licking silver poles. But I mean, after that, I've had to have. I mean, if you look at me, my hands are literally shaking.
They are. Ah well.
So,
times.
anyway, the last guild question,
Yes.
Georgios.
The last guild question dealt with us, not with us, but sort of built on our own experience of changing throughout the years in the hobby.
Evolution, some might say.
Evolution, some might say, yes. And apparently we were not the only ones.
I've evolved from previously all right to chronic cirrhosis sufferer in 2 weeks.
That works. I mean, I don't know if it's an improvement, but it is a change, so technically it qualifies as evolution.
Well, the beauty of liver disease is that, my skin is sort of, yellow.
Tangy.
It kind of looks like I've got a tan.
Excellent. So you think that's what Trump does? Is a huge liver disease?
Huge liver disease.
Oh, poor boy.
But he keeps himself alive, pumped up on twatness.
Twatness.
Which is, if you look at Silvio...
It's basically when you take a dead possum and tape it to your forehead, right?
I don't know what the hell you're talking about. You should drink less absinthe, to be honest.
Probably.
But if you look at Berlusconi, right?
Yes.
Old, should be dead, ain't dead.
Yeah.
Trump, right?
Old, yeah.
HW?
Also quite grey, yeah.
Yeah. Twats.
Fantastic, so to speak, yeah.
Twat equals longevity.
Ooh. That's depressing.
That's why when I find some of these otters that they're all talking about,
Right.
I'm gonna kick them.
Excellent.
I reckon that'll put a couple of years on my life.
Excellent.
Anyway,
Actually, one question. It's a murder of crows, right?
it's a murder of crows. It's a parliament of owls.
Right. What is it about twats?
It's a
Tinkering?
political party of twats, I believe.
Ah, so it's Tory of
A
twats.
parliamentary Labour Party of twats.
I see. Excellent. Okay, so now that's out of the way. Let's get back to our faithful listeners and their desire to hear their names mentioned on this glorious podcast.
So, let's talk about Phil.
Yes, Phil, the real Phil, not the fake Phil.
He insists...
Yes, he goes by his nom de plume,
Yeah, he insists his name is
not Phil.
Patrick.
All right, Patrick. You can probably hear the air quotes.
But we all know it's Phil.
We all know it's Phil. Yes, interestingly enough, Phil had a very quick evolution. I think he kind of almost fits the general evolution that people have mentioned on the guild in that they started off very merry, trashy, very easily accessible games. There's a strong sprinkling of pop culture, especially sci-fi bent.
Yeah.
And then apparently some sort of stage of, I guess you would call it growing up, sobering up,
Maturing.
like
a
cheese.
I was just about to say the self-same thing, except I was going to
Blue cheese.
expostulate it in a rather more refined manner.
Expostulate. Is that?
I'm not even sure that's a word, Georgios.
It might be. It is now.
I'm sure board gamers listen to this and they're incredible pedants, so I'm sure they'll tell me.
No, I think they're smart, sophisticated people who just happen to know the difference between expostulate and blather.
Blather away.
Now, Patrick, who's actually Phil, or the other way around, has, as he said, a very quick evolution going from general, slide games to Avalon Hill games, stupid Steve Jackson games, and then suddenly his appreciation for more complicated games. I think it's kind of mirrored enough in the fact that some of us also went through puberty, I guess.
I came out of the womb covered head to toe in thick, wiry hair.
Ah, right. So does that put you post or before puberty?
Oh no, I came out fully pubescent.
Ah, I see.
Because I was covered in pubes, you see.
Ah, yeah.
For our American listeners, that's pubic hair. Slang for pubic hair, pubes.
Yeah, you British are really clever about your slang.
Real clever.
So basically, that seems to be a common theme, that as people grow older, as people become sort of mature, as long as they're still playing games, they feel quite attracted to complicated games. They tend to appreciate more complicated games. They tend to appreciate not so much convoluted, but like delicate designs, as you would find in your standard Euro game.
So do we have, because we've had quite a few people who've written, well, sort of Tolstoy-length autobiographies on the Guild, which is wonderful.
Which actually I'm kind of hoping for more Tolstoy-length biography, or any sort of story, because it's really far more interesting to hear about people changing as gamers, or just their preferences, than it is reading about, I don't know, politics, I guess?
Well, no one wants to read about politics at the moment.
No.
Because no one literally wants to see a big turd on the street punching itself in its own face, which is politics. A big shit punching itself in its own face.
Yeah.
It's developed sentience and also masochism.
Ah.
Politics is a massive, masochistic turd punching itself right in its own peanut face.
Well, you are aware that Buddhism is basically saying that sentience and masochism are the same thing.
I've seen past the dark side of level 9, Georgios. Me and L. Ron Hubbard had a cocktail and then abused some sailors. Okay, so, any general themes?
That was a weird reference. I don't think I got it.
Right, I'm very subtle.
I know.
So, any general themes about where people evolve from and to?
Interestingly enough, one of the common themes is background in RPGs, which I think kind of supports my general theory that there is a strong desire for thematic experience, even in Eurogamers, and this dejection of theme doesn't matter. It's just the game design is horseshit.
I've been thinking about this recently.
Right.
And I actually am beginning to come to this conclusion that people who reject theme protest too much.
Yes, exactly.
I think, actually, that theme is... I'm beginning to come to the conclusion that if I didn't give a shit about theme, I just play chess and Yinch.
Yeah.
And I am not drawn to those games in any way.
Right.
And so what does that say? It suggests to me that the theme of the thing means something.
Yes, I think it adds. It's just it's flavor. I mean, you could basically eat flavorless grey gruel every day, or you can eat something that has some flavor to it. You'll be satisfied at the end anyway. But one is fun, and the other one is kind of okay.
Exactly. So they go from RPGs. The fucking nerds.
Wait, you're the one with 2 RPG groups running currently, right?
I hardly think that's an apt conclusion to draw.
By the way, after a long, intense preoccupation with RPGs, I've actually been sober for a couple of years, unfortunately. So I'm not quite sure where we now stand on the nerd scale.
I'm less nerdy than you. Genetically, it's a genetic thing, Georgios.
It's a genetic thing.
I was born into a family of cool, cigarette-smoking, sort of 50s teddy boys. And whereas you were born into a family of computer programming nerd faces.
So does that mean I'm going to be rich soon? Yes! Yeah, so basically RPGs feature often, sci-fi geek culture features often, and then again, after a while, they step into Eurogames. Usually during the 90s, I guess we're more or less kind of similar age, somewhere between 20 and 45.
That's right.
Which is where I am. And a lot of people just kind of go through this. I don't want to call it a phase because it seems like I'm dismissing it, but they do have a step where they delve into Eurogames. Some of them stick with it, some of them kind of at some point move out and discover lighter games, shorter games, slightly more thematic games. Some of them just go even deeper, like Inception really working there, and go towards even more complex games, like heavy, maybe even war games. I think it's fascinating that a lot of people seem to have some sort of commonalities with that kind of ties to complexity, and I'm going to assume ties to time management as well.
I think if you really get into it, I think there is that point where you dive into the complex.
Yeah.
And some people swim, and some people hop straight back out the pool again and go, okay, that's a little too far for me.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I think if I look at my own gaming experience, as long as I have the time and the gaming group, I'd love to try heavier games. But if I have a gaming group that's sort of veering towards the lighter end, I'm just going to enjoy more lighter games because that's the only thing that's available to me. So
it's interesting that most people who contributed to the guild didn't mention masturbation quite as much as Tony Boydell did. So I'm just going to read Tony's. This is eminent game designer of Snowdonia, Pfust, and the now very hot Guilds of London.
Yes.
Eminent, very respected man.
Clearly.
In the board gaming world.
Well, why did you feel the need to sort of slip in the board gaming world as a qualifier?
Because it's such rarefied air.
Ah, I see.
That it.
So it's not the respect is somehow lessened because...
No, it imbues even more respect.
Ah, I see.
So, this is what he said. And I'll do it in his voice.
Yeah, you're good at impressions, I noticed.
I used to role-play. Then we got into Risk, Diplomacy, and then Samurai Swords. Samurai Swords took up our Wednesday evenings thusly. Nice use of the word thusly.
Yes, I'm quite impressed.
Meet around 5:30pm at the chip shop and get supper. Nice use of the word supper. It's quite Victorian. Gives the story some heft.
I see.
Eat whilst watching Star Trek Next Generation, original UK broadcasts, in my bedsit.
Again, this is a very, very clever use of geek credentials to sort of give the impression that this person knows what they're talking about. They're, in fact, one of us and not one of them, whoever them may be.
So for our American listeners, bedsit is an English word that would equate into America as luxury condo. Play Samurai Swords until Ian's mum popped round to take Ian home. Everyone else went home too. I can't help but wonder whether Ian's mum was something of a cougar.
You always wonder that when a female is mentioned.
I've got a picture of Ian's mum in my mind.
Of a four-legged creature.
It's quite an arousing picture of Ian's mum.
Okay, I'm sure Tony Boydell will tell Ian.
With the room to myself, commence masturbation. In 1997, I got into Magic the Gathering and was a founder member of the Cheltenham-based club.
Alright, and now this is, I think, quite obvious. I think this is masturbation mentioned 4 times in 2 sentences. That's too much.
Exactly. Cheltenham, Magic the Gathering.
1997 as well.
1997. The wankiest year in recent history.
Quite, yeah.
Got work contracting Londonwards, and as well as MTG, started playing older Euro games like Age of Steam, Power Grid, Princes of Florence, and a new card game called Glory to Rome.
Now we're reaching the point that masturbation has been mentioned so often that it's bordering on the...
It's swimming in...
profanity, basically.
It's swimming in gametes. There's gametes all over it.
Quite.
Playing more in-depth games inform my design aspirations and vice versa. Now I much prefer medium to heavyweight games. Masturbation still plays a part too.
Of course. I mean, he said medium to heavyweight games.
A lot of masturbation.
Basically.
And so, because the length of your contributions were so lengthy...
You are a wordsmith extraordinary.
Thank you very much. I write Jeremy Corbyn speeches for him. We'd just like to give you a list of those who sent in contributions. So, Ben O'Steen, it was nice of you to write, Ben. This might be the first time you've been mentioned on the Guild.
Yes, Ben, thank you for writing, and thank you for being one of the people who actually replied to us on Twitter.
He 3D printed me a meeple once.
He did?
I got it. I'll get it out later.
The innuendo is starting to unnerve me.
Dan Hughes. who's got a cartoon picture of himself.
Allegedly. We do not know what Dan Hughes looks like. This might actually be a real life picture.
It might be that he lives in
this square.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit world.
I mean, that's a dangerous world to live in, but who knows, you know?
Ooh, dangerous. Jessica Rabbit's there. Oof. Hot tamale. Barry Doublé.
I remember Barry. He's been on the show before.
I remember him. I remember hearing him going, goodbye, as we whizzed past him on Board Game Links.
Yes, Board Game Links. We're still there. Nobody cares, but if you do care, give us a click. We'd love it.
Rob Harper, who's poly-obsessive.
What's poly-obsessive?
I think that means he's obsessed with lots of things. Or
not just polygons?
Or parrots. Damon? I assume that's either Damon Albarn of Blur fame or Damon Hill of Formula One fame.
I'm going with Blur fame because I have 2 Blur albums in my collection. And hello Damon, love 13, and Blur is fine as well.
Josh Groban?
Josh Groban.
Of Gaming Rules Vids?
Yes, haven't heard from him much. But, actually no, he did actually deign to interact with us on Twitter again.
He did.
Nice.
It's nice. I like chatting with Josh.
Yeah, it's nice to have celebrity around.
Giant Kumquat.
Yes.
And Tony Boydell grilled him on the Guild to ask him whether it was a giant kumquat or just a large orange, to which he replied, a kumquat, definitely a giant kumquat, sour, oval, pointy and smelling of kumquat. I don't believe him. Lisa Jeppo Jepson?
Yes, Lisa.
And someone here, he's gorgeous. Who's this? Ben Maddox. He's beautiful, isn't he? His picture's very arousing, Georgios.
Looks like a prick.
That's quite arousing, isn't it, in certain quarters?
I don't know.
Well, all of these girls on Tinder...
Right.
I mean, I assume these library of dick pics I send them constantly.
Right.
I assume I don't get any response back.
I think they're probably...
So I assume the minute they get a picture of my dick, they're off frapping themselves into hilarity.
I can sort of see the hilarity, yeah.
Because it's quite arousing, my penis.
Hilarious, maybe.
Anyway, well, thank you for contributing, and
yes.
I'm gonna go and order a frappe from Janine.
You should.
It's a long way, Georgios, from
here to the bar,
from 2 distant shores to meet again on an archipelago when you have to cross rough seas. But I'm hoping that one day we'll be able to mutually plant our flags onto the same heath side and develop a mutual understanding that is based upon respect.
I would suggest, instead of saying this, you just say, hey Janine, how are you? Could you make me a frappe?
Insanity. Say goodnight, Georgios.
Nah, next time.
It's crass, unsophisticated, and emotionally manipulative.
It's this week's review. So there is this boy. Let's call him Feth, because that is definitely a name that exists. And he's in a bit of a bind, because he has a girlfriend in a coma. I know, it's serious. But that's just how it is. But this boy wouldn't be called Feth, which is definitely what he is called, because that is a name that people have, if he didn't do what any respectable boyfriend would do, and dove into his girlfriend's mind to piece together her memories and wake her up. His girlfriend, by the way, is called Ren. While on the run with Feth, again his actual name, fleeing from her life as a courtesan apprentice, having lost her family in the plague, she saw the elder courtesan shot down and out of grief, fell into a coma. I bet you didn't see that one coming. So much like that Christopher Nolan movie Insipid, or whatever it's called, one player will travel through 3 dreams to put together the Dodoitsu poem that beats in Ren's heart by drawing cards, placing cards, and cleverly using special abilities to make it through. Ren, being in a coma, can only communicate by way of picking one single card of those played by Feth, which he then has to decipher into what he should attempt to do next. All this while ravens threaten to devour Ren's memories that Feth has discarded. Now what do you call that game? The Aristocrats! No wait, the Ravens of 3 Sahasree. Yeah. Skip to the end.
It's the 1 sentence review. The Ravens of Tree Shashiri bubbles up through the subconscious and courts your attention with a truly engaging asynchronous experience.
The Ravens of Tree Shashiri is surprisingly evocative and challenging, while giving each player interesting choices with far-reaching consequences.
Georgios? Ooh, what's that in the corner of the room?
I don't know, but it's eating peanuts with its nose.
So,
Yeah.
Tree Shashiri.
Almost, yeah.
That's the name of the girl, right? Tree Shashiri?
Maybe, I don't know.
She owns some ravens?
Kind of. Yeah, I can see you paid a lot of attention during the play.
Now, are these the same ravens in Game of Thrones that they talk about?
Possibly. I'm seeing a obvious missed opportunity as far as licensing goes.
You could be like the ravens of John's, what's his name? Jon
Snow.
That's right.
You now have to say, you used to be able to say, you know nothing. Now you have to say, King in the North.
King up the north.
Sure.
So, the elephant in the room, Georgios,
The elephant in the room is yeah, go ahead.
is the story
Yes.
behind it.
I would agree.
I think people make O faces. Ooh.
Well, there are two things that...
Sorry, just, isn't an O face when you have an orgasm?
possibly.
Is that you, ooh, not oh. Oh.
Well, it's always you would see it. Oh no!
Yeah, because I mean, it's literally 2 seconds in.
What? Right, so the backstory. I think there are two things that jump out, at least that jumped out at me right away. One is, I think, fairly easy dispensed with. It's a convoluted backstory. It really is, considering the fact that it's not straightforward card game, but it is a card game. The story is quite convoluted. In the second edition, the English edition, it's nicely written in sort of paragraphs with Ren and Feth speaking individually of how they met, how they fell in love, how they ran away, but it's like really complicated. Like, Ren's family died from the plague, and then she ended up as a courtesan apprentice, but she didn't want to, and then she met this foreign boy whose father was traveling in Japan, and then they ran away, and then she saw somebody else get shot as they ran away, and then she fell into a coma. It's a long-winded story to get to the point of playing this game.
Well, what's really interesting, we'll come back to that, because I'm not sure I entirely agree with you, but I think where people have an issue
Right?
is the word courtesan.
Right.
Do you think this is a wider symptom of a social ill that we have, in which we're regressing back to some sort of Victorian prudity after the liberation of the 60s and 70s? Since September the 11th and the crash, we're becoming more and more conservative, and even the hint that she is somehow a sex worker is to be crushed, because it's not part of what gaming is.
Well, I don't know if that's the reason why. It might be the reason why people feel icky about this backstory. I think there are a couple of factors that play into this. There's the fact that she's obviously underage. It's a boy and a girl, not a grown man and a grown woman. There's the fact that she didn't choose this line of work. This is all this is fairly dark and sinister material. And the fact that it's used as a background, and I'm not sure the game makes a case for it being necessary for the game to function. Surprisingly, I was reminded the same reason why I felt the backstory was a bit difficult was the same reason I felt conflicted about a game like Mombasa, which also deals with certain periods of history and sort of picks these things up. In this case, exploitation of the African continent by European industrialists, I guess. You kind of wonder why. Why bother picking up using this theme specifically to deliver a game? And the same question, I guess, could be leveled at this game. Why pick this very dark backstory for this game? What does it add? And I think it actually does add something. I'll talk about it later. But the question nonetheless is there. Why? What's the point?
Well, I think a large issue is because we have this issue which is very prevalent in popular culture, in all forms of popular culture, with the woman as damsel.
Right.
The woman having no agency.
Right.
Yeah? And the question is, I think because she's a trafficked person, essentially, you know, someone forced into the sex trade and then in a coma, and The question is, does she have agency? And within this game, the agency comes through what you actually do as a player. Do you feel that you affect the game, or you're just a passive observer watching someone try to solve your problems for you? I don't have this issue in this game because I've played both parts. And ostensibly, when you look at it, possibly you could argue that the female role, you're doing less. But actually what you do is fundamentally crucial to the game being solved. You are solving your issues by the way you play the game. It is a communal, cooperative game in which both people's actions are not only valued, but valuable. So her story may be sort of classic damsel fare, but when it comes to the point in which you take the narrative on, which is playing the game, she is absolutely fundamental to her own liberation.
Yeah, I'll probably talk about this a bit more when we talk about the experience of the game. But as far as the story goes, I think going back to your other question, I'm not sure it's so much repression as it is confusion. I mean, generally, when I look at any piece of media that deals with dark themes, like human trafficking, like sex trades, I mean, my first reaction is not, all right, that's interesting, that's engaging. It's like, all right, is this going to be okay? Is this exploitation maybe? Is this maybe...
Well, do you think it's exploitative?
No, I don't think it matters as much as it would have to be exploitative.
Because I think it's subtle. Also,
Yeah.
I think, and we'll come into this later, but I think the theme is very well woven into the mechanisms of the game.
I agree.
It feels right. And actually the story gives the game a greater importance.
Yeah.
For me, I tell you what, should we go on to the experience?
We probably should, yeah.
So, what did you think of my interactive, candid photo montage?
Well, it was certainly an experience.
Okay, so this could be your standard card game, right? But it's really interesting. So the game, you have these cards which are Ren's memories. And you have to arrange these memories in a certain way to allow her to create this poem within her heart that will awake her from this coma, okay?
Yes. Again, it's very, very lyrical, and we're literally using the game terminology here.
And on these cards, you have grids, and you can only place gridded parts on gridded parts, and on the cards are also areas that are not gridded, and you can only play gridded parts on gridded parts and non-gridded parts on non-gridded parts.
Exactly. And we used the original first edition, the Japanese edition, the very, very pretty English edition, the second edition by Osprey Games. Instead of a grid, there's an overlay, colored overlay. The cards are Dixit sized and there's a colored overlay instead of a grid, but essentially it's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what you have to do is arrange these memories in the way that they can fit with each other to make sense, to allow her to make sense of the situation she's in, to draw herself out of this situation, right?
Right.
And if you look at the cards, the pictures on the cards, while they're certainly not exploitative, there's no scenes of rape. There's only the implication. The hint. There are certain pictures where she's kneeling down and in the far distance there's a tall figure walking away. You see shots of her happy childhood.
Yeah.
You see her grieving for the death of her parents. All of these things. I played the game once and then Georgios explained the theme to me and it absolutely improved my subsequent play of the game.
Yeah.
If a game works as a system, you can play it without the theme. Absolutely. But the theme in this improved my gameplay. It improved the story and it brought sense to what I was doing. Therefore, as convoluted as it is, I think the story contributes to the gameplay. You get to a point in the story where they then say to you, you take on the narrative from here. You decide how it happened, which I think is empowering, interesting, and refreshing.
I think it's quite interesting that I agree with you. There's a strong narrative there, but unlike, say, many other games where basically the game itself tells the next step in the narrative, in this case, I felt the story, the memories you see on the cards, the backstory kind of rings in the back of your head, sort of infused the entire experience with a melancholy, with a certain desire to see this girl succeed, to see this girl wake up and escape. And it was quite surprising, quite exciting for me when I played this game again, to feel like emotionally invested in the well-being because of the story, because of the way that these memories are depicted there, like the happy childhood on some cards, or the dark times that she goes through occasionally, not occasionally, but in her story. It really made me want to help or to contribute to winning this game. And I don't often have this. I had a vaguely varied, but far softer experience with Pandemic Legacy, where I wanted to succeed, where I wanted my characters to survive, because I'd grown attached to them, not just because they had great abilities, or maybe some of these other games that sort of have a campaign mode of some kind, where you attach them, where you want them to achieve certain things. But in this game, even though I've played a bunch of times by now, I still want Ren to wake up at the end.
Yeah.
I'm still invested, and it's not just because I want to win, but because everything about the game, the atmosphere, the design, the story, just sort of gets something out of me, gets an investment out of me that I don't get from other games.
And as this varies from Mombasa,
right?
Mombasa disregards. It cuts out, it edits history and says, we're only going to focus on this element, because this element is, we don't really want to get into that argument, but the fact is this element is intrinsically connected to this other element. The businesses running in Africa are intrinsically connected to exploitation, murder, and slavery, right? Mm-hmm. What this game does not do is ask you to disregard parts. It says to you, this is the story. Look, people are being exploited. Young children are being exploited here. And it asks you to say, this happens. I don't think it asks you to change the world, but it doesn't. It's not negligent in its theming in the way Mombasa is deeply, deeply, deeply negligent to the point of being offensive, whereas this isn't.
I can see that. Yeah. Interesting enough, coming back to this you mentioned earlier, I'm very ambivalent. I'm just not sure if this veers into exploitation or not. I honestly don't know. I can't tell, because, I mean, it is, at what point is a story about dark subject matter just, a way of dealing, sort of inducing these sort of melancholic sad moments? And at what point does it become exploitation?
Well, I guess the question is, using a woman as the victim in a story, is that exploitative or not? And the fact is, I think, in certain cases, when women are used as rewards, when women are used, the princess in Mario is a classic example of women simply being used as a MacGuffin, as a device.
Right, yeah.
Whereas in this, through gameplay, she has an active role in determining her own fate. Now, the fact that it's cooperative, the fact that the guy opposite the table is a guy, makes people think, oh, well, here we go. It's just a guy saving a woman again. It isn't. The fact is, once you play both roles, even though from the other side of the table, you may think that what she does isn't as mechanically involved, what you're doing is absolutely integral to winning the game. And if you play that role badly, if you play the role of Ren badly, you'll lose the game.
Yeah, exactly. I think the interesting thing is this asymmetric experience really adds a lot to make this game unique, to make this game feel really fresh and different from what you usually play. Well, I think we probably can jump into design and talk a bit more in detail about what the differences are and how they affect play.
So what do you get if you mix together sexual frustration, hatred of the world, and congenital stomach problems?
That's basically you.
That's design. So, theme is nothing without the actual game connected to it.
Exactly.
Otherwise, it's just a story, right? So, how does the design of the game... I think the designers of the game want you to engage with its story.
One designer, Kuro, he's called. The pronunciation is probably completely wrong, but that's what it says on the box.
So, how does the designer of the game use the mechanisms of the game to convey what he wishes to convey?
I think this is really quite interesting. And in that sense, the game is really quite remarkable in its design, because I want to focus first on Ren's part, the allegedly passive part. Because, I mean, the closest comparison I have is actually Android Netrunner, which has a similar asymmetric fields, also to play a game, but it's competitive. And the cooperation side deals a lot with assumptions, unspoken hints, unspoken threats, sort of where you put out bait, where you try to lure people into traps and so on and so forth. It's all about mind games in a way. This game isn't that different. As Ren, you have certain responsibilities. You need to make sure that the cards that Feth lays out in front of you into the Atman. Again, much like Android Netrunner, the terminology is something to get used to.
It's obscure. There's a lot of sort of, well, I guess if you're a Buddhist,
I guess, yeah.
you probably know these words, but as I'm not a Buddhist, I don't agree with their passivity. I prefer angriness.
I can tell. Yeah, so basically, you need to make sure, you need to imply or somehow give suggestions what kind of cards need to be placed in the middle, what kind of values, because of the way you need to draw out certain cards of certain colors and certain values and place them in front of you to complete the poem. You need to have like, I think the values need to be 7, 7, 7, 5. So you look for certain cards as Ren to draw out of the Atman, and then there can be follow-up effects because
the Atman, by the way, is the cards in the middle of the table.
Yeah, the cards in the middle of the table. If you draw out one card, there might be the possibility of the Atman splitting, which means certain cards that get discarded, which might be something you want or might be something you don't want. It's quite a complex game, which how the game justifies its convolutedness. But it works because it gives you a nice framework to act in and sort of give your opposing, not your opposing player, the other player, the kind of hints and suggestions to know what you're after. And I think this is really what makes the game great. Because of the many effects of the rules that are in the game, if you draw one card, it can mean a number of things depending on what happened before, what's going to happen, what you want to happen afterwards, and what you've done so far, maybe how long you've played together. And this is really remarkable, I think, because this is the best way a cooperative game can work, in that every action, kind of like Battlestar Galactica, every action you take has multiple meanings, and the other players need to figure out what's going on, need to sort of get into your head to play well.
There are communication restrictions in this game.
Yes.
If you say certain things, the game breaks down. It's a fact. Mm-hmm. So as the Ren character, you have hidden cards, and you need to make sure that the cards in the middle, after you've completed your poem, which is having cards of value 7, 7, 7, 5. Make sure that the cards that you have hidden, that in the middle there aren't any cards that are not of that colour.
Exactly. The colours of Ren's Heart need to match the colours in the middle of the game in the Atman.
That was a much better way of saying it.
Slightly shorter, yes.
Yeah, mine was quite rambly, wasn't it?
A little.
I'm very high on heroin right now.
There's that, but also, I mean, this is something that I will have to admit is a kind of a flaw in the game. It does have a learning curve.
For sure. Which I don't have an issue with. Lots of games have learning curves. So if you tell people what cards you've got, it's going to break the game. It's going to make it exceptionally easy. So you have to, but again, she's in a coma.
Right, yeah.
You can't talk. You literally can't say to people, blah, 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 you know. And so it evokes that sort of feeling of him sitting there next to her in a bed saying, hey, remember when this happened? And remember when you were with your parents? And, oh God, I remember when I rescued you from that horrible man. And piecing together, and her hearing this and within herself, piecing these things together and gradually pulling herself up to consciousness. I think the mechanisms in this game fit the theme of this game, which a lot don't, and this does, and it's evocative and it's exciting.
It is, yeah. I think it's, again, there's something, I find the idea of diving into her consciousness, diving into her dreams and piecing them together hilariously fantastic. Like, I'm not trying to be dismissive. It actually fills me with some kind of joy. Just this unreal idea of diving into people's dreams and helping them through them and piecing them together and so on. I really like that about this game.
And Mariner's Law does not need to be invoked in this.
Yeah, that's
You don't need to use your imagination. It's there for you. It's there within the mechanisms of the game. You have to do a little bit of homework. You have to read the story beforehand.
Yes.
It's not got writing on the cards that give you...
Yeah.
It's saying, read the story, we'll lead you up the story path to this point, then you take the story on. So you have to do that bit. You have to read the story, but after that, it makes perfect sense to me. I think the design of the game contributes to the story of the game.
It does. I think there's another interesting thing about the design. In the second edition, the English edition, which I'm now calling the English edition, by Osprey Games, there are envelopes that gradually introduce rules that make the game harder until the point where it's the same difficulty as the Japanese original, which I also find hilarious for cultural reasons.
Well, the Japanese version is incredibly hard.
It is.
It's sort of like the epic level on a normal cooperative game is the rules of the game.
Yes, basically you lose cards out of the deck due to ravens being these negative cards that sort of
Eat your memories.
They eat your memories, yes. Very evocative again, very, very fantastical. If you have to discard cards, they slip under the raven, and if at the end of the turn the raven hasn't been chased away, all these cards go back into the box, meaning in the next turn you're going to play, the next dream you're going to play, you will have less cards available to you, which means you might not be able to finish the game.
Because she's lost her memories, and these memories are gone, so there's less memories there to react. She's sinking lower and lower into sort of vegetablehood, I guess.
Yeah, very, very politically correct, but yes. Yeah, again, it all makes sense within the game. The theme is infused in the rules. The rules sort of, once you get them, once you're past the terminology, once you kind of know what's happening, it makes sense completely. It's very thematic, very evocative. The design, I don't think has much, much fat to it. There's not much you would cut. Everything is very delicate, very precise, and it's hard as, in the words of Ben, balls.
Yeah, the game lasts 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
Yeah.
It's short, but it's one of those games that feels like a real game.
Yeah.
It feels like you've played something substantial and something interesting, and it's hard. Cooperative games have to be hard. If they're not hard, they're not enjoyable. Mm-hmm. And this game functions as a game fundamentally, which is the most important thing, I think, that it functions as a game, because it's not a novel, and it's not a film, and it's not a ballad. It is a game. It functions as a game, but the theme really reinforces it. The story really reinforces it and invests you with a desire to succeed. Playing this made me want to play. So, Georgios,
Ben.
Tree Shashiri.
Almost.
The Ravens of Tree Shashiri.
There's a tree, sure.
What did the Ravens of Tree Shashiri
You'll need to stop doing that.
make you want to play?
I'm going to half cheat. One, it makes me want to play this game again because it's fun, it's great, it's substantial, it sort of, it satisfies. You sit down, you play it, and it's great fun, and then you move on to play something else, and an hour later you go, actually I want to try this game again. But I mentioned it earlier, Android Netrunner. Also 2-player, also asymmetric, plays a lot with, has a strong component of mind games in there, of implied information. I'm not really up to date on the tournament scene or anything. I have like a couple of cycles and that's it. And it works great. If you're into tournament play, you can probably play that. I think the biggest difference is that Android Netrunner is just as convoluted. It's just as heavy with terminology. It has asymmetry as well, but it's competitive. So yeah, basically, if I am in a mood for a game like Tree Shashiri that's cooperative, I'll play this one.
Sorry, it's Tree Shashiri.
Right. If I'm in the mood to play this game that you mentioned,
Tree Shashiri,
which is definitely what it's called, and in a cooperative mood, I'm going to play this game. I don't think there's anything that really compares to it, and it's small and it's inexpensive. It looks fantastic. And if I'm in the mood for some really, really cutthroat, competitive gaming, then there's Netrunner.
Yeah, so it makes me want to play. If we're talking about engrossing, thematic, cooperative games that put you in a story that is not just making money or planting crops, it makes me want to play The Grizzled again.
All right.
They're very similar in many ways. The Grizzled isn't asymmetrical. They're mechanically not similar at all, but the emotions it invokes, the sort of seriousness of theme and the interesting angle at which that theme is approached, they both trigger that same itch. They both bubble up through my subconscious into that hind part of my fore part of my brain. I'm not a bloody brain surgeon, for God's sake, but they make me feel the same things. They make me think about the same things. They make me go away from the game feeling I've been told a story that's interesting and to the left of most of the stories that are told in games, you know. Should people go out and buy The Ravens of Tree Shashiri?
Well, as always, I'm going to have some caveats. If you're alive if you have money, about 15 euros or so, yes, go buy it. Come on. It's a good game. I think it's a great game. It's a great 2-player game, which I don't get to play often enough. And yeah, there's no reason not to pick it up. It's really, really good.
It's innovative, it's interesting, tells a great story. It's something new and unlike things that you've played. And cheap. Go out there, buy it, get those ravens and shoot them in their little beady eyeballs. Rat. Georgios?
Ship?
We're not playing Mallet's Mallet.
Alright.
Rat, Georgios.
Cool.
Why am I saying the word rat?
Because you're stuck in the 80s?
It's because that's what I had for tea last night, Georgios.
Why?
Rat.
Why?
Because I'm stony broke, Georgios. I had to go out and catch vermin and eat it on the street.
How does that work with your vegan diet?
I'm being honest, it's compromising it somewhat. So, you know, I'm literally eating rats here. So on our website, to try and solve this, we've installed a donate button.
We did, yes.
If you like what we do and you think it's worthy, you can click the donate button. I asked Georgios where the money goes.
It does not go to a Swiss bank account, and any claim to the contrary are lies spread by the opposition.
And he coughed and went, slush fund. Slush fund. And I don't know why he has a slush fund, but...
Why wouldn't you?
And I assume he has total financial control of it, so I assume...
Yes.
He'll give me my fair share.
You get 2 rats next week.
Double rat burger. So apart from the donate button, which you can find on our website, which is, Georgios?
Infoperfected.com, because we are almost semi-professional.
There are lots of ways you can contact us, and we love to hear from you, not just your monies. Georgios?
Yes, there's a lot of ways to contact us and tell us what to do with the money you might not, or you might give us. There's the website, Infoperfected. There's email, infoperfected@gmail.com. There's Twitter, @Infoperfected. You might notice a running theme here. There's Instagram, Perfect Information. Yeah, we broke the theme at some point, yeah. There's Facebook, which is the Perfect Information Podcast.
Which is what this is.
Which is pretty much what this is,
Meta.
Yeah. There's also the Guild on Board Game Geek, which is 2348 if you're into numbers, or you just look for us on podcast or Guild or something. You'll find Perfect Information, I'm sure.
You will.
There's Snapchat, which we haven't used yet because we're both old and ugly.
That's true.
I think that mostly covers it. I think that's the way you can contact us if you're interested. Give us a line. Give us a line on Twitter. We always like to answer. Or you can give us a click or a heart on Board Game Links.
And I don't want to hammer this home, but if you want me to masticate double rat next week, donate button on the website.
On the website.
And Georgios, have you anything to add?
Yes, I have a great insight to add, which I came up with all by myself and I have not stolen from any better comic. Keep in mind that if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs, maybe the revolution has finally come.
Say goodnight, Georgios.
No.